What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and as you can kind of tell in my voice, I am struggling just a little bit here today. And so I'm going to do my best to break down what was a very roaring opening victory for the Tulane Green Wave in their 37-17 win over the South Alabama Jaguars. I would just like to momentarily shout out myself because I was a lot closer with my what I thought was thoughtless score prediction than I thought. I had said that I predicted 34-17 on my Friday episode where I had Dave Schultz as a guest who's covered the Jaguars since 2019, is the host of Locked On Sunbelt with the Locked On Network. And I remember him saying, if Tulane's able to hold South Alabama to under 17 points or less, well, you have a real football team on your hands. And guess what? Tulane's a real football team in all three phases of the game, and they have a real college quarterback. And you saw all of that on display and more in that opening game. I think you saw a lot of question marks get answered. There are still some questions, I think, that you're still going to need a couple of weeks to figure out. But for all of the turnover on the coaching staff, for all of the turnover of players, and this idea of can Tulane go into the season not being that quiet underdog that no one saw coming, they're the team that, teams are making very ill-fated helmet decisions on heading into the game, saying that they're the home of Mardi Gras. Well, Tulane is 1-0 on both the season and on letting the good times roll on Mardi Gras here in the Big Easy with that. But all that to say, that's kind of the attention that Tulane's getting now. And are they able to handle that with their mentality? Again, I think all of the answers to that question were yes. I think you saw the most of it out of the most important position on the field in quarterback. Michael Pratt had nothing short of an elite opening performance. But to me, the secondary, the way that they responded when the going got tough was where you really saw the identity of this team start to form. So I've obviously been sitting, on the depth chart going into this week. And so I knew who would really be taking the field at all of those roles. But Tulane fans did see basically a completely different middle of the field, defensively speaking, than what they were used to last year. I mean, the obvious were gone in Dorian Williams and Nick Anderson and who really replaces them. But then you also have Macon Clark at nickelback, Larry Brooks and Lemmy Young at safety. All of those guys are gone. And you saw completely new guys at all of those roles take the field for Tulane. You have, I think, the most experience and depth on the defensive line that, man, did they show out. I believe they sacked the quarterback four, if not five times. But all of the production that they got, Patrick Jenkins forcing a fumble, Cameron Hamilton forcing a fumble as well, having 2 sacks, I believe, between the two of them. Just the production that the interior was really able to get going on that quarterback, especially when you're looking at pocket passers, having a type of defensive line that can collapse the interior like that. It really spells good season ahead for Tulane. And I just go back to talking to Patrick Jenkins at Tulane's media day and him saying that just the way that Sheil Wood is coaching them, that they're just going to be flying to the ball from all areas. And it's really going to be hard to predict that pressure. And it was really good to see, again, that production really stick out in the first game. Tulane won the turnover battle by far. I mean, there were some fumbles that I think the team would like to get back, but just going back to Jaquan Jackson's near fumble on special teams. And then I don't know what you call what happened with Alex Bauman, where he caught it. It went directly into a South Alabama player, and then it fumbled back to a Tulane player. What stuck out to me the most was how humid and wet it was out there. Being on the sideline really gives you a feel for what the field conditions are, and you're really feeling it out there with the players. And I will say that was the first game that I felt like I might have my legs give out from under me and not come back. There was a time where I was kind of staggering to the ground by the cheerleaders because my calves were just cramping up at the same time. And there was a point where I looked on the field and I saw Michael Pratt just trying to wipe his hands off with a towel. I just think that people forget how sweaty you can really get on the field down in New Orleans. And it was one of those times where it was kind of reminiscent of the conference championship where it was supposed to rain that afternoon or, before kickoff, and then it just hung in the air instead. And that's exactly what it did on Saturday night. I will say that it probably spelled a better attendance, and we did see fans come out in droves, although I am going to get to that in my kind of closing segment on how we really need to show up against Ole Miss and that my voice cannot take another week of kind of making us get going on third down, but there have to be people in the stands in order for me to kind of yell at them to get it going. And so that was really a sight for sore eyes, walking in, seeing that student section filled to the brim, and to think that there's not an effect of them on the way that Tulane played throughout that game, especially when that game was really a battle of momentum until the fourth quarter. I mean, I remember going over Willie Fritz's coaching principles from the AFCA coaching convention that I went to earlier this year in my preview for this game on last Tuesday. And, those are win the running battle, win the takeaway battle, and special teams, wave don't beat the wave on penalties, and then finishing in the fourth quarter. The penalties one is probably the only one that Tulane could really stand to take a second look on, but I'd have to go back and kind of look at some of those penalties, but you just can't beat yourself like that. Thankfully, you saw Tulane respond in really strong ways to several of those penalties. On offense, Dante Fleming had a face mask penalty. The team immediately responded with Jaquan Jackson having a massive catch, 47 yards for a touchdown right after that. And just seeing some stuff between the lines, which I'll get to when I kind of break down the offense, but trying to keep on track here. That game, the ending score does not really dictate how credible South Alabama really played until the end there. And again, for a defense that had a lot of new players, you saw a little bit of growing pains. You have an entirely new, again, secondary out there. DJ Douglas and Bailey Despaney were the two just starting safeties. Cam Pettisclo was there at the slot role. You saw them rotate in Shaquem Laissez a little bit at that position. Darius Swanson, the transfer safety, came in for a few snaps as well. There was times where Cam Pettisclo was backpedaling into that coverage as the single high safety. And it was just, again, really good to see all of those guys be making plays and how they responded to what was probably the worst portion of the game when the secondary just kind of broke down entirely and South Alabama was in the red zone and Boyson was just left completely wide open in the end zone. I mean, I didn't even see him at first. He was 2 feet in front of me, and I was looking at the play going on the other side of the field. Shieldwood definitely had some choice words for the defensive backs on the sideline, which I won't repeat here, but, and proverbially screwing up the game for everyone else with the way that they were playing. The way that they responded after that says it all to me. They turned it over on downs with a sack on the quarterback for that final play. And the following drive after that, they made an interception that really sealed this game. Those two interceptions came from Lance Robinson and DJ Douglas. That's different points in the game, and they came at really important times for that unit. I kept going back in my head to the Southern Miss loss for Tulane last year. It was a game where I think you saw a little man-heavy coverage for Tulane more than usual, and they got a little bit eaten up in coverage. There were some breakdowns in the secondary, and you saw frustrations boil in that never seemed to go away. I to pause this to cough for a second. I apologize. My apologies, y'all. There was no cute way to go about that. Again, getting vocal nodules as a kid really coming back to bite me now because my voice just does not have that much to give. But getting back to my point about breaking down in coverage against Southern Miss and just kind of seeing no one really step up and either take responsibility or just kind of get everyone going. I remember following in the team into the tunnel at halftime. I don't know why that was so hard to say. Backing up a little bit. Jarius Monroe was just kicking himself for not getting an interception on one of those plays. It just kind of slipped out of his fingers. But I guess it's just going to keep happening. Again, last year, I think there was a necessary kind of emotional management going on of getting the team through some of those games. And just the way that they played defense of kind of that bend, don't break. It is a little more patient of an approach, whereas there is a risk to the opposite of that and the aggressive nature with which you saw Tulane take the field. But, I'm someone that I went to the scouting academy. I've talked about that on this show. And I finished the secondary defensive backs as, saying that I'm able to scout the traits at all those different roles. And I cannot emphasize enough how difficult it is for a team to replace both your starting strong and free safety, or however you want to call them if they're more interchangeable, and your starting nickel, which is now anchor. So much so that they, have a coach on this team, Rob Green, specifically dedicated to coaching anchors. It really paid off in that game because there was a point where the slot receivers were just eating them up in those flat routes. And that was really, again, where you saw Shieldwood get kind of hard on them, but really kind of figuring out who was taking the flat, where the backside safety was going to be. You heard Jarius Monroe step up, yelling about needing that backside safety, needing someone in that coverage situation. And then you saw one of those interceptions take place by DJ Douglas just a few plays after that. And I'm going to make this announcement now. I am hiring, technically the phrase is intern, but she is so much more than that. And her role is going to continue to grow. But Mackenzie Mitchell, she's a graduate assistant over at Tulane's creative services director. I am bringing her under my wing here on Before the Whistle. And I just wanted to shout her out because she was on the sideline with me all game and was able to capture so much between the lines of things that is difficult for me to hear when I have the broadcast on in my ears, but just having a second pair of eyes that was really paying attention to a lot of those meetings. And she noticed something that I think really sticks out, thinking about the mental toughness and the battle of that secondary throughout that game. As again, as I was saying, it's just so hard to replace all of those positions and the nuance with which you need at every single one of those roles. Anchor, which is, I guess, what we're calling it now. That was Macon Clark last year. I remember during that offseason, because Jaden Kennedy was the starting nickel safety slot anchor, whatever you want to call it, my first year. Then they had to move him to cornerback because of just personnel change. And Macon Clark struggled quite a bit with the intricacies of that role heading into that year and just the mental frustrations. But you really saw him grow into his own and become, just to me, he was born to play that role. He, alongside several other of the players from last year, including Nick Anderson, Deuce Watts was there. I'm trying to avoid this as best as I can. Macon Clark was there, and there was a point where Jarius Monroe was getting a little frustrated and down on himself on the sideline. Mackenzie caught that he went over to Macon Clark and, kind of received some immediate in-game coaching from him. And that, to me, just when you talk about being able to continue this legacy on, and when you hear guys like AJ Hampton say they came and they saw the culture instilled by these guys and staying with Jarius Monroe and how all of this really becomes a brotherhood, it just goes to show you that that doesn't stop just because these guys no longer are wearing the uniforms on the sideline. And again, as someone that I think could put himself in the shoes of these secondary players, having Macon Clark there on the sideline was just such a valuable asset during that game. But you have all of that communication that needs to go on there. And whoever was making those calls last year, just isn't there anymore. And the communication between cornerbacks, the anchor role, and the safety role, understanding where the linebackers are going to be, understanding, again, how to scrape alongside them in order to stop the run, where you need to be in coverage, where you need to account for the slot receiver, having so many new faces there. Honestly, I think that they performed a lot better than one would think, despite some of the penalties that went on in that unit. I think, again, you saw just a strong display of mental toughness and a group of new faces and leadership in guys like Jarius Monroe. And I think a little quieter leadership in someone like Lance Robinson, who I also think is just one of those guys that his play just speaks for himself. And he always has just had that next man up. I'm not next man up, because he's always been there, but I just don't think that he always gets perhaps enough of the attention that he deserves in his ability to stop the run and come downhill, make those reads. He had such a key stop against Adrian Martinez in the Kansas State run, where I just remember he read that play and is able to just make tackles in open space like no other. But he was one of the elected defensive captains for that week's game alongside Patrick Jenkins. The way that they're going about it right now, you have Michael Pratt and Sincere Haynesworth as your offensive captains, but it just speaks to how big of a void it is in replacing Dorian Williams and Nick Anderson, that they're not just, going with two captains yet. I think you're going to see them vote guys in on a week by week basis, at least for the time being. But to have those two guys be Patrick Jenkins and Lance Robinson, have Lance Robinson have a fumble recovery forced by Patrick Jenkins, have an interception, including all the tackles that they all had. But to me, the trenches on the defensive side were the most exciting thing to me. You saw nothing but production from those guys, and you saw it in a rotation. You saw it on the interior. You saw it along the edge. You saw them able to just collapse the pocket, shut down the run game again, holding them to 75 yards on the ground. Having guys like Patrick Jenkins just getting all in that backfield, and teams now know that they have to fear those guys again for making one of the biggest plays in history for Tulane with that Cotton Bowl safety. Was interesting. Actually, I rewatched the conference championship last week, just kind of preparing for the season jitters, if you will. It sticks out how much of a difference this turf is, both just in field play and how crisp it looks. But it stuck out that Patrick Jenkins almost got a safety in that game, I believe. And it was just kind of crazy to see guys like Alex Bauman in that game making catches, knowing what that would all kind of turn into. But having that carry over to this game, having guys like Cameron Hamilton also getting back there, really collapsing the interior. And then that's where the secondary needs to reform. You saw them take it away in the air, and you saw them recover on the ground. You saw them respond to blown coverage by stopping the team on downs, ending with an interception, finishing throughout the fourth quarter. And again, holding a team that had over 100 yards in every game, but one last year to 75 yards on the ground, 190 in the air, 17 points, and winning that turnover battle. There is just really not more you could ask from that unit that I think people had the biggest question marks about of, who was going to kind of step up, and was that all just kind of a flash in the pan for Tulane last year? What's it going to look like with all these new faces and new coaches? Your answer still remains a hell of a group of fighters. On the offensive side of the ball, I don't know what else you guys could ask for really out of a quarterback and out of an offense as a whole. But I mean, Michael Pratt to go 14 of 15 passes for 294 yards, 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I mean, that is an elite level performance, and it rightly earned him AAC Offensive Player of the Week, Senior Bowl Offensive Player of the Week. And he did it right in front of Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, who came down and was at Tulane on the sideline. I saw him before the game. I'm assuming he probably went up to his scout seat in the press box to watch Michael Pratt. And geez, did that kid just take off and show again what it feels like seems to be Tulane's best kept secret until it's not. But just like we were kind of trying to yell it from the rooftops last year about Tajay Spears, I'm doing that again this year with Michael Pratt. And he's someone that I just always go back to the pandemic. When I had met the former voice of the Green Wave, Todd Graffanini, on Twitter. And this was before I had even moved back to New Orleans. I was still in Philadelphia, and we had met on Twitter. And I remember there was a time where he called me and said, you might want to turn on the Tulane game. They put this kid in halfway through the season. His name's Michael Pratt, and he just seems like he might be worth the watch. And a prognosticator, Todd Graffanini, 3 seasons later, yeah, he was worth the watch, and he was worth every moment of that watch on Saturday night. The only pass being one that just went through Jaquan Jackson's hands in the end zone where it got, just a little bit grabby. But I mean, when you talk about all of these new rules going on in college, and, the clock is still running, and that affects how teams are able to play the game of football, I almost feel like Tulane, it kind of works for them. They're going to eat up the time of possession with the running game. And no, it's not going to look as flashy or as pretty as last year. And no, it's probably not going to all come from one player in the form of Tajay Spears. And no, I don't think you're really going to get answers for that depth chart for a few more weeks. But you know that you can lean on your quarterback, and that's ultimately what, is more important. But you also, again, you saw guys like Mekhi Hughes step up and be a very pleasant surprise back there and offer pass protection, offer some in the ground. But ultimately, a good quarterback, if you just go back to the Cotton Bowl, it is a miracle that Tulane pulled off what they were able to pull off. But just the fact that Michael Pratt has the mobility that he has, but that he chooses to be a passing first quarterback and has worked on that so carefully every single season, just seeing what he does over the offseason. I remember this year, he was just working so much on his footwork and doing a lot of drills that you'd see kind of in those Drew Brees videos. And I've said this, but I'd asked him kind of who he looks to study in film, and he said Drew Brees. I think that you can officially make that comparison from what you saw on Saturday. And I was kind of alluding to it in the Cotton Bowl in terms of his ability to lead a fourth quarter comeback in the way that you could also say reminiscent of Peyton Manning or something. But I mean, the flea flicker pass was just beautiful. The throw is beautiful. His footwork has been beautiful. The anticipation, the timing, his ability to adjust to what are now a new group of wide receivers that offer a completely different picture than Shea Wyatt and Deuce Watts and those guys that made up the majority of the snaps and the majority of the receptions last year. You have full gas pedal speed in Jaquan Jackson, Lawrence Keys, Chris Brazzell, Dante Fleming, Keith Brown. I mean, the list just goes on of guys that would all probably be really high up there in a track meet together. And there are also guys that played high school ball together in Jaquan Jackson, Lawrence Keys, and Dante Fleming. And so just seeing that chemistry come out, seeing Chris Brazzell immediately make an impact on that opening series. He's someone that you can't coach height, and he is several inches above the rest of the wide receiver group, but he was a little undersized last season, and he put on, 10 or 15 pounds this year. But what I liked the most was he adjusted and he came back for Michael Pratt. And the fact that I believe it was the face of pressure on something like the second throw of the game, and his first look was Chris Brazzell. To me, that says so much about his confidence in him as a receiver. And then you just keep going down the line. This was also something that Mackenzie caught that I thought was extremely important when you look at how the following plays unfolded. The South Alabama missed that field goal early on. And when you talk about all three phases executing for Tulane, they really did win it in all three phases of the game. But unfortunately, they were only able to capitalize on that with 3 points of their own. Valentino Ambrosio, as perfect as always, on a 29-yard field goal. But he had missed a throw to Jaquan Jackson on that third down play. And she saw that he kind of banged his helmet in frustration, but made it a point to go over to him, find him on the sideline and tell him, hey, you ran a good route. Like, that was on me. And then going down, high-fiving the row of teammates like he always does. In the following series, there was a face mask penalty that Dante Fleming had committed. Immediately, the response was a 47-yard touchdown pass to Jaquan Jackson. And that's where I really enjoyed having a second pair of eyes. And just when I say how much I love my job on the sideline and what I'm able to observe down there and what Mackenzie was able to observe as well, it's really those in between the line things that I think tell the story. And again, to see that he went over there, he instilled that confidence in his wide receiver. He put it on himself. And then they immediately executed following a penalty that could have really messed with the momentum at that point in the game. Lawrence Keys, the openness with and the separation that these receivers were able to get. I mean, it might have been something that they were just quicker than that secondary, but man, were there just real plays where you could see. She also caught Troy Dannon, our athletic director, uttering, wow, that is a real group of wide receivers on one of Lawrence Keys' passes. And I had said this during the broadcast on the sideline, but I'll say it again. I had talked to Lawrence Keys after Tulane's final scrimmage, and he had mentioned that after the Cotton Bowl, him and Michael Pratt sat down. They went over all the film of last season and really looked at what they could do this year, what little adjustments that they could make, and just his mental switch that, he was primarily that motion jet sweep guy and that he can run more than just those slant routes as that slot receiver. I mean, you could see his ability in the first, second, and third level of the field with ease on Saturday night. And he's just someone that I've been just kind of waiting to break out of the gates ever since that was announced that he was transferring over from Notre Dame. I remember seeing him in that first spring practice and just seeing that the ability for him to be up to game speed and understand what was going on here. He just had a feel about him that I couldn't really put my finger on, but it felt just different than what I was kind of seeing out of the wide receivers at that point. Then he got a Liz Frank injury, and that probably unfortunately stunted his development. Dejon McDougal was kind of the person that I think he was behind on the depth chart, but when he ended up, leaving the team, that's when Lawrence Keys came on really strong at the end of the season. And I will always go back to that Jaquan Jackson insane. I think it was an 87-yard touchdown. It tied the longest touchdown in the Cotton Bowl. He does not make that without Lawrence Keys going stride for him, downfield blocking like hell that entire way. It was awesome. And also his returns in the kicking game. Those were a really big part of Tulane's field position in the Cotton Bowl. Again, you don't want to see fumbling going on from those guys that are surefire, but I am inclined to, again, point to just the insane levels of humidity that were going on in that game. But I think, again, while you might have wanted some answers out of the running back room, I have to give credit to what was a really stout run defense in South Alabama. One that, again, they returned 19 of 22 starters from last year. I mean, you just get that as an experience level that is really difficult to get around. But I think as that room is kind of shaping up, it was really good to see the other room step up and see guys like Alex Bauman make catches, who we know can also do that. But he, to me, is just the definition of a complete tight end. And that's something that Tulane really hasn't had since I've been on the sideline. You either had, your kind of receiving option in Tyreek James, or you had your pass blocker, run blocker in Will Wallace. And I have to say, there are so many Tajay Spears runs that just don't take place last season, if not for what Will Wallace was able to do as a blocker. And so knowing that Alex Bauman has the ability to step up and do that, but seeing how many times they brought out tight ends and really leaned on that unit in Chris Carter, who was a transfer from USF, Reggie Brown going out there as well, heading into his second season. Just again, the next man up mentality was just infused throughout the team, and it couldn't be just more important under center than who they have in Michael Pratt. And again, I had said this in the pregame show, but you can make up for a lot of areas on the field with a good quarterback. And I think that Michael Pratt, as much as we're saying, oh, he's never going to win the Heisman, I don't really see why he shouldn't not be in the conversation at this point. He beat Caleb Williams straight up last season. He performed when he needed to do so in the Cotton Bowl. Again, 1 minute left, no timeouts. All of your starters go down at tight end, at wide receiver, and he trusts Alex Bauman. He uses his legs, and you saw all those traits and more on Saturday. And so heading into this weekend's matchup, Tulane fans, you guys have literally been incredible. I cannot get the visions of the conference championship out of my mind or the Cotton Bowl. And that was just such a lagniappe surprise of droves of Tulane fans that came out to Arlington and packed that student section. And all the pictures that you're seeing going around from the opener, watching the players go out for the coin toss to a packed student section. A 2022 team can officially say that they left their legacy and that they've straight up changed history. But now we're going a step further here, guys. The Ole Miss game, 2021 season. I'm going to go back to that. We are, 27 days in Birmingham, Alabama, at a renovated hotel, practicing at Legion Field, having a bus there every single day. The team is working out relatively at a Planet Fitness and eating a lot of Subway and Uber Eats for essentially a month before they have to go up and play an SEC-sized school and SEC-sized trenches on both sides of the football. Then you get a 3-hour rain delay where they have an indoor practice facility. They don't let Tulane in. Tulane brought all 100 of their players down because we were going back to New Orleans finally after that game, and it stopped halfway along the way in Tupelo, Mississippi, which is where our hotel was located, and they couldn't fit everyone under the tunnel, so there were players that were just getting rained on. There was one thing that stayed throughout the entirety of that 2 to 3 hour rain delay, and that was a psychotic student section. I'm going to post this video on Twitter. The DJ from that Ole Miss game literally had the night of his life. I remember that just going around on Twitter where he was just slinging tracks for this entire time. The lights were going. I can't get Sandstorm out of my head for this reason. And then I heard it on Saturday. Our DJ played it and I was able to kind of laugh at it a little bit. But those students they probably shouldn't have been there considering it was also a lightning delay, but they stayed there the entirety of that rain delay like the lunatics that they were. And that was the most hostile environment that I have been to without question. And it bordered on a little, uncomfortably hostile at times. I'll just be straight up without getting into the weeds of it. Really aggressive words from two 12-year-olds who told me to F myself when I walked into the stadium. That's what you get in the SEC. Tulane, it is time to show that G5 schools can be just as much of a problem at home field, having home field advantage. And that really needs to show up this weekend. Again, going back to that Kansas State win, it just seemed like Tulane really thrived on that away feeling. And I think they really thrived on the deafening crowd noise coming down. And then I go back to the championship game where you just heard Tulane, really like make a blip on the Richter scale at that point. They just were roaring that whole game. Everyone was standing up. The Glazer Club was on their feet. The Tulane students were screaming through the fourth quarter. And again, 100% of the battle is getting everyone there in the first place. And I am so proud of Green Wave Nation and these students that, again, I never witnessed a quarter of football like this as a student in my 4 years there at Tulane. And these students have made Tulane football a Saturday night event there, even though some of them leave at halftime to go to the boot. Crowd noise is the most important home field advantage that a team can have. If you live in New Orleans, go to a Saints game. Watch an old Saints game on TV. Watch how reverberating and loud that they get on every down, but especially on third down. That is so important because a quarterback cannot hear the play call in his helmet. He can't get that play off to his receivers on the line of scrimmage if they have hand signals and are able to adjust based on that. But you have to make teams fear that noise and come in with a plan of something like having to think of what happens in that situation. The good thing is that there is, kind of the element of surprise if we make the biggest roar possible. There were 2 moments in the South Alabama game where the student section got loud after some pumping up for me. I just kind of went over to them at the end of the second half and I said, you guys have 2 minutes. Make them have to call a timeout. Just make a noise. There are so many of you that if you just all yelled, it would still be better than what's kind of not happening here. And there were 2 false starts that happened on offense and immediately timed out with how loud the team was. And I believe there was a timeout called as well, but you saw that happen several times during the championship game. And I just cannot emphasize enough how important that noise is and how important it is for you guys to really not just be there, but to be loud. And if it's only on third down, then I will take what I can get at this point, including fourth down. But I heard that soccer chant, that da, 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 da. If that's what people need to start chanting in order to kind of keep it going, because I get that you can't just kind of incessantly make a sound, although I have certainly tried my hardest, but these guys could really use that 12th man on or 13th man on defense. 12th man on defense, my math is fine today. And that really comes from Tulane's home field advantage there at Yulman Stadium, one that I think was to be anticipated in that Oklahoma season matchup that unfortunately got taken away for the team. It's probably fair to say that this is going to be the biggest game in Yulman Stadium history without question. And I know that the game is already sold out, but there are a lot of Ole Miss people that live in New Orleans, that live around here, that are going to be traveling in droves for that game. And I can tell you that this defense really thrives off of crowd noise and getting those turnover beads, and you guys being a part of that and being able to make a difference as fans. It is really fun when you're in the Superdome and, they have to call a timeout and they say fan impact play. I would suffice to say that the student section had 2 fan impact plays with those false starts on Saturday night. And I know that this is going to be a really hot matchup. If you have an umbrella hat, get one. Drip Drop was what I used to drink after my boot weekends when I was a student at Tulane. I would really recommend that everyone go get those packets and start drinking one every single day leading up to that game. You are going to sweat like you have never felt sweat before for that 2:30 kickoff, but these guys need you to be loud and they need you to be upright and healthy as well as them. But in order to do that, you guys got to wear sunscreen. You got to stay hydrated, but you got to stay through the fourth quarter. And I'm just, to be able to be at a Tulane home game and feel the feeling that I got when I did walk down on, I cannot say, there's too many misses going on, Ole Miss's Stadium in 2021, and just having this feeling of, it was really my first travel game. And just, again, the SEC speaks for itself and what their field conditions and what their stadium looked like as a whole. And, I really think that Tulane can have their own big time moment with a roar wave this Saturday. So again, y'all, I hope that you come out in droves. I know the game is already sold out, but that also, when you get there, we got to show up on crowd noise. And again, that is this Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Our pregame show will start at 1:30 p.m. on 104.1 The Spot, as always. And I'm sure I'm going on radio tonight for an Ole Miss show and previewing quite a bit of this very anticipated matchup going into this weekend. And I'll be looking around with with Mackenzie in order to find a guest for this week to preview Ole Miss going into this weekend. But again, I just wanted to shout out Mackenzie in this podcast and all the insight that she brought me on the sideline. And again, just having that second ear, because I, for lack of a better term, am half deaf at this point, and I could barely hear as is on the sideline, and I'm not good at reading lips. And then you add in trying to keep Corey and Steve in one ear and then trying to do all that at the same time. And then just the fact that, I'm either not seeing plays on the field or not in another meeting. And I'm oftentimes a spotter for who's made the tackles, depending on where Corey and Steve's viewpoint is in the booth. But just all of the meeting notes that she brought me and those little things like Michael Pratt and Daquan Jackson's exchange, I can't stress enough how much I enjoy being on the sideline and the reasons why. And it's just really great for me to bring someone alongside me. And I gave her little to no direction and, to go into those huddles to get that information and get you guys as much information as we can about this 2023 Tulane football team. I'm doing great today with my enunciation. Well, that's just, again, it's more than I could have asked for. And I'm just so excited to get rolling into this season. It's just been a pleasure breaking down all the season previews going into this year. And I must say, it is extra sweet to break down a resounding win and a 1-0 victory for both the home of Mardi Gras and your Tulane Green Wave. I will see you all on Friday.